An alibi created before the murder happened. How? Welcome to Mystery Case. I'm your host, Detective Echo. Comment where you're tuning in from. I love reading them. Let's investigate. If you've ever tried to describe Nero Wolfe's brownstone to someone who thinks a home office is a folding table and a laptop, you learn fast that language is a blunt instrument. Wolfe's house on West 35th isn't a building so much as a private jurisdiction, rules, rituals, schedules, and penalties. The front door is less an entrance than a border crossing, and Fritz Brenner is the customs officer with a gentle smile and the authority of an emperor. That afternoon, the jurisdiction took a poke in the ribs. It started innocently enough, which is how most trouble likes to introduce itself. Wearing a clean collar and carrying papers, I was at my desk in the office, boots on the blotter, considering whether I could persuade myself to type 3 letters without resenting the effort, on when the doorbell sounded upstairs. A minute later, Fritz appeared in the doorway, his face mild, but his eyes alert in that way of his that meant somebody was carrying either arrogance or desperation. "A gentleman, Archie. He says he must see Mr. Wolfe at once." "Name?" "He gives it as Mr. Calder. He has—" Fritz hesitated, which in him is the equivalent of a siren. "A letter." "A letter? That's quaint. Bring him in. If Wolfe throws him out, I'd like front row seats." Fritz vanished, but I swung my feet off the blotter and stood, straightening my tie out of habit. I didn't do it for the visitor. I did it because whenever the door into Wolfe's world opens, it pays to look ready. Calder came in behind Fritz, tall, thin, with the stiff-backed poise of a man who believes gravity is negotiable. His suit was expensive, his shoes were expensive, and his expression suggested that expense entitled him to immediate service. He held an envelope between 2 fingers like it might stain him. "I am Conrad Calder," he announced, as if the syllables should make the furniture scoot aside. "I require an appointment with Nero Wolfe." "Appointments," I told him, "are what people who don't require them get." "You've got a letter," Fritz says. Calder's eyes flicked to my chair, then to my face, weighing me for importance. He came up short. "I was told," he said, clipped, "that Mr. Wolfe occasionally receives written communications." "He receives mail. He doesn't always read it." "Hush, hand it over." He hesitated, then gave me the envelope. It was thick, unsealed, and the flap had been pressed down without licking, either squeamishness or calculation. I slid a finger inside, drew out a single sheet, and glanced at the top. The date stopped me first. February 13th. That would have been tomorrow. I read the opening line and felt the small hairs at the base of my skull stand up as if my nerves had decided to hold a private meeting. Mr. Wolfe. At 4:10 tomorrow afternoon, I will be seen leaving the offices of Kershaw and Blount on Madison Avenue. I will proceed directly to your residence. If I do not arrive by 5 o'clock, you will know that something has intervened. What intervenes will not be accident. There was more, neat and precise, like a man writing his own weather report. It mentioned a ledger, a promise, and something called the Harlow Clause. As if that should mean something to Wolfe. No, it ended with a sentence that made my stomach tighten. My alibi will be established before the act. That is why I come to you. I looked up at Calder, and he looked back like a man who'd already heard every possible reaction and found them all inadequate. "This letter," I said, "is from who?" "From me," he snapped. "Dictated and signed. The date is correct. The date is tomorrow. It is intended to be tomorrow." "That's a trick," I said, "or it's a confession in a tuxedo." His jaw tightened. "I'm not confessing to anything. I'm attempting to prevent something. Mr. Wolfe will understand." "That depends," I told him, "on whether he's in a mood to understand people who show up with stationery and attitude." At that moment, I heard the slow, heavy tread from the hall. Wolfe's tread, the one that says he has left his chair only because a principal has been offended. He appeared in the doorway to the office, a large, immovable presence even when he was moving, yet his face composed in the familiar blend of disdain and curiosity. "What is this interruption?" he demanded. I handed him the letter. Wolfe's eyes moved across the page, and something subtle shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but recognition, as if the words had touched a file in his mind and the file had teeth. He looked at Calder. "You have brought into my house," he said, "an affront to chronology." Calder swallowed. "Mr. Wolfe." "No." Wolfe's voice was calm, and which in him is dangerous. "You will speak when I permit it. Mr. Goodwin, the date." "Tomorrow," I said. Wolfe's gaze returned to the letter. "An alibi written before the crime," he murmured, almost to himself. A crude ambition, yet not without ingenuity. Calder's hands tightened on the brim of his hat. "I am in imminent jeopardy." "In this house," Wolfe said, "jeopardy is commonplace. Competence is rare." He lowered himself. He never sat quickly, as if haste were vulgar, into his chair in the office, the red leather creaking under his weight like a reluctant witness. "Mr. Calder," he said at last, "you have disturbed the sanctity of my afternoon. For that you will pay. Whether you will also be saved is a matter that remains to be determined." I watched Calder's face, and for the first time the arrogance slipped enough to show what was underneath. Fear, sharp and private. Outside, the brownstone held its breath, and inside, the Nero Wolfe began to think. Wolfe placed the letter flat on his desk and aligned it with the edge of the blotter, a small ritual of order before he permitted disorder to speak. "You assert," he said to Calder, "that tomorrow at 4:10 you will be observed leaving the offices of Kershaw and Blount." "Yes." "By whom?" "By my secretary, by 2 partners, by a messenger who comes daily at 4. "You have arranged this observation?" "I have made certain I will be seen." Wolfe's eyelids lowered. "And at 5 o'clock you are to arrive here?" "Yes." "And if you do not?" "Then something will have occurred which I cannot prevent without assistance." I leaned against my desk. "You could try telling us what that something is." Calder's gaze flicked to me in a way. "A theft, or the appearance of one." Wolfe made a small sound in his throat, not quite impatience. "Appearance is often more destructive than fact." "What is to be stolen?" "A document, and a single page from a bound ledger. The ledger belongs to Kershaw and Blount." "A law firm," I said. Calder nodded. "I am a junior partner." "Ambitious?" I asked. He didn't like that. "Competent." Wolfe's fingers rested lightly on the letter. "This document, why is it valuable?" "It contains a clause," Calder said. "An addendum to a trust agreement drafted 6 years ago, the Harlow clause." "The name appears in your letter," Wolfe said. "You assume I am acquainted with it." "I am not. Enlighten me." Calder hesitated. I watched the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of risk against necessity. Finally, he said, "The clause directs a substantial portion of the Harlow estate, upon the death of the current beneficiary, to a foundation not yet publicly disclosed." "Secret philanthropy," I said. "Not secret. Merely deferred." Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "And the current beneficiary?" "Mrs. Adelaide Harlow, 78, in declining health." "Ah." Wolfe's voice was almost gentle. "Ours and the foundation." Calder's mouth tightened. "Its board has not been finalized." "That is not what I asked." A beat passed. "I am to chair it." I let out a low whistle. "So if the clause vanished?" "The estate would revert to the previous language. The funds would remain under private control, distributed at the discretion of Mrs. Harlow's nephew." "And the nephew," I said, "is less charitable." viciously practical, Calder replied. Wolfe's eyes never left him. You believe the clause will be removed from the ledger tomorrow? Yes. By whom? I don't know. Yet you anticipate it sufficiently to write an alibi in advance. Calder drew a breath. Because suspicion will fall on me. Why? I asked. Because I have been the most vocal advocate for activating the foundation, because I have argued with the nephew, because I drafted the addendum myself. And because, Wolfe said softly, you have access. Calder's silence confirmed it, and I crossed to the window and back, letting the pieces line up in my head. So tomorrow afternoon you make sure plenty of eyes see you leave the office. Then you come here and sit in this chair while someone else removes the clause. When it's discovered missing, you produce your alibi. Nero Wolfe. Calder's gaze sharpened. Precisely. Wolfe's brows rose a fraction. You propose to use me as a clock. I propose to place myself beyond reach of accusation. And what? Wolfe asked. So do I gain from serving as your furniture? Calder's composure cracked again, just enough. If the clause disappears, Mrs. Harlowe's wishes are subverted. The foundation dies before birth. You have a reputation, Mr. Wolfe, for preferring justice to convenience. Wolfe's lips compressed. He disliked appeals to reputation almost as much as he disliked movement. Justice, he said, is a word often employed by those who seek advantage. I seek prevention. Or protection, I said. Calder swung toward me. Do you imagine I would be foolish enough to steal the document and then announce in advance the hour at which it might vanish? Criminals, I said, have done more for less. Wolfe lifted a hand. Silence settled again, thick as velvet. You have informed no one else of this letter? He asked. No. Have you shown it to any colleague? No. You have not dated it by mistake? Calder's jaw hardened. No. Wolfe studied him for a long moment, then turned to me. Mr. Goodwin. Yeah? Telephone Saul Panzer. Calder blinked. Why? Because, Wolfe said, I do not function as an accessory without information. Mr. Panzer will discreetly observe the offices of Kershaw and Blount tomorrow afternoon. He will verify whether the spectacle you promise is enacted. And if it is? Calder asked. Then, Wolfe said, we shall determine whether the alibi you so carefully compose is intended to shield innocence or to disguise premeditation. Calder swallowed. You believe I might still commit the theft? I believe, Wolfe replied, that a man who writes tomorrow's alibi today is capable of almost anything. I went to the phone and dialed Saul's number, watching Calder while it rang. His fingers tapped once against his hat brim before he stilled them by force. Fear was there, yes, but so was something else. Anticipation. When Saul answered, I told him we had a modest surveillance job for tomorrow, 4 to 5:30, Madison Avenue. So he grunted assent. I gave him the firm's address and said we'd supply details in the morning. I hung up. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed. Mr. Calder, he said, you will return tomorrow at 5 precisely, not a minute earlier, not a minute later. And if the clause is untouched, then you will have wasted my time and paid for the privilege. And if it is gone, Wolfe's gaze sharpened like a blade finding its edge. Then someone has written more than an alibi, and they have written a challenge. Calder nodded once. Very well. He turned to leave. At the door he paused. Mr. Wolfe, if I am correct, events are already in motion. They always are, Wolfe said. The question is who believes he directs them. When the door closed behind Calder, the house seemed to exhale. I looked at Wolfe. You buying his story? I am purchasing nothing, he said. I am observing. You think the clause will disappear? Wolfe's eyes opened fully now. Mr. Goodwin, as if it does not, then Mr. Calder is merely vain. If it does, then the crime began not tomorrow, but today with that letter. And the alibi? Wolfe's gaze drifted to the paper on his desk. An alibi, he said quietly, is most interesting when it precedes the act it claims to deny. Wolfe did not touch the letter again that evening, but he did not remove it from his desk either. It lay there through dinner, through his post-prandial beer, and through the hour he devoted to a monograph on Balkan orchids, as if the sheet of paper were another guest in the house, quiet, patient, and potentially dangerous. I went over it twice more after Fritz cleared the dishes. The phrasing was clean, almost legalistic, but there was an undercurrent in it I didn't like. Not fear, intention. "You're thinking," I said finally. "Obviously," Wolfe replied without looking up from his book. "You think he wrote it to bait us?" "I think," Wolfe said, and turning a page with exaggerated care, "that Mr. Calder wishes to control the narrative of events. He assumes that by fixing a time and place in advance, he can confine suspicion, meaning he's either clever or desperate, or both. Would you steal your own document if you could make it look like someone else did?" Wolfe shut the book. That meant I'd scored a point worth considering. "The question," he said, "is not whether he would, and it is whether he requires the theft to occur at all." I blinked. "You think the clause might never be in danger?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that a man who anticipates accusation may seek to provoke it under controlled conditions." "Set the stage," I said slowly. "Arrange the alibi. Let the document vanish. Then point at whoever he wants." Wolfe inclined his head. "Possibly." "Then why bring us in?" "Because," Wolfe said, "if the disappearance is genuine and not contrived, so he requires an independent witness of unimpeachable reputation." I grinned. "That's you, not me." "Correct." The next morning unfolded on schedule, which in our house is not a courtesy but a commandment. Wolfe disappeared to the plant rooms from 9 until 11. I used the time to telephone Kershaw and Blount under the guise of a potential client. A brisk female voice identified herself as Miss Eleanor Vance, secretary to Mr. Calder. "Is Mr. Calder available this afternoon?" I asked. "He has appointments from 3 until 4, she said. "After that, he is expected to leave promptly." "Promptly?" "Yes. He mentioned he had a prior engagement." "Does he often leave at 4:10? A pause. "Mr. Calder's schedule is his own concern." "Fair enough." I thanked her and hung up. When Wolfe returned downstairs, smelling faintly of damp soil and superiority, I relayed the conversation. "So," I concluded, "he's laid groundwork, and people expect him to leave at 4:10. "Expectation," Wolfe said, "is a powerful accomplice." At 1:30, I telephoned Saul and gave him the fuller picture. He listened without comment, then asked 2 questions about entrances and adjacent buildings. I supplied what I knew. He said he would position himself by 3:30. By 4 o'clock, I was restless. Wolfe, of course, was immobile in his chair, eyes closed, hands folded over his vest. To a stranger, he would have appeared asleep, and I knew better. His mind was ticking like a metronome set to suspicion. At 4:12, the telephone rang. I grabbed it. Nero Wolfe's office. Saul's voice came through, dry as paper. Calder exited at 4:10 on the nose. Secretary saw him off. 2 men in suits near the door, partners maybe. Messenger boy came in at 4:08. "Anyone follow him?" He hailed a cab. "I've got a man tailing. I'm staying put." "Anything odd?" A pause. "Window on the 3rd floor opened about 4:05. Hard to see from here." "3rd floor?" "Ledger room, maybe." "Keep watching," I said. I hung up and relayed it to Wolfe. "Continue to receive reports," he said. At 4:30, the phone rang again. "Goodwin." "Calder reached your street," Saul said. "Cab dropped him half a block away. He walked the rest. He's entering now." I looked up as the bell sounded upstairs, precisely on cue. I checked my watch. 4:58. Timing, I muttered. Fritz admitted him. Calder entered the office, and face pale but composed. "It is 4:59, he said, glancing at the clock. "You see, I am here." "You are punctual," Wolfe said. Calder sank into the red leather chair opposite the desk. His hands were steady now. Too steady. At 5:03 the telephone rang again. I picked it up. Saul didn't waste time. Commotion upstairs. Someone shouting. Hard to hear. A woman. "Stay there." I covered the receiver. Trouble. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "Proceed." I returned to the phone. Details. Secretary came out onto the landing, talking to one of the partners. Looks agitated. Another man went back inside. "Any sign of police?" "Not yet." "Call me when you know more." I hung up slowly. Calder's knuckles had gone white on the arms of his chair. "What has happened?" Wolfe regarded him without sympathy. "It appears that your prophecy approaches fulfillment." "You mean—" "Nothing," Wolfe said crisply, "until confirmed." 5 minutes passed. No one spoke, and the clock on the mantel ticked with a deliberate cruelty. At 5:10, the telephone rang again. Saul's voice was clipped. "Ledger's missing a page. 3rd floor conference room. Secretary says Calder was last to review it this morning." I felt the air shift. "No police yet," Saul continued. "They're arguing. One partner's on the phone." "Stay put," I said. I replaced the receiver. Calder stared at Wolfe. "You see? I was right." Wolfe's gaze was icy. "On the contrary, Mr. Calder, as we see only that a page has vanished. Whether you were right or responsible remains to be determined." Calder half rose. "That is absurd. I have been here since 4:58. "Indeed," Wolfe said softly, "which is precisely what you intended." Silence fell, heavy and charged. Outside, somewhere downtown, a single sheet of paper had slipped from a ledger. Inside the brownstone, the Alibi had just come alive. Calder remained half out of his chair, as if indignation might provide lift. "This is precisely why I came," he said. "You must see that." "I see," Wolfe replied. "A circumstance exquisitely convenient to you." Calder's mouth opened, then closed. He lowered himself slowly back into the chair. "You cannot possibly believe I arranged this." "On the contrary," Wolfe said. "I can believe almost anything. The question is what I can prove." The telephone rang again before Calder could muster another protest. I picked it up. "Goodwin." Saul's tone had shifted. Police have arrived. Uniform first, now a detective. I recognize him. Kramer's squad." "Kramer himself?" "Not yet." "Stay close. If they start sealing doors, step back." "Yeah." I hung up and looked at Wolfe. "That won't improve his afternoon." "It will clarify it," Wolfe said. Calder's composure was fraying at the edges now. "Mr. Wolfe, if Inspector Kramer becomes involved, I will be formally questioned. My presence here will be verified," Wolfe finished. "Which is what you desire." Calder swallowed. "I desire not to be ruined." "You assume," Wolfe said, "that ruin proceeds from accusation rather than guilt." Calder's eyes flashed. "Are you suggesting—" "I am suggesting nothing," Wolfe said, cutting him off with a lift of one finger. "I am observing that you predicted a theft with remarkable precision. That prediction now appears justified. Either you possess foresight uncommon among attorneys, or you possess information not yet shared." Calder hesitated. There it was again, that calculation. "I had reason," he said carefully, "to believe the nephew was growing impatient." "Name," Wolfe said. "Dylan Harlow." "Occupation?" "Investor. Speculator. He manages certain residual family assets." And he opposes the Foundation. Vehemently. Has he threatened you? In words? Number? In tone? Frequently. I leaned against my desk. Anyone else with access to the ledger? 2 senior partners, asked Miss Vance. Myself, the firm's archivist. Names, Wolfe said. Harold Bixby and Thomas Kershaw, the partners. Eleanor Vance, my secretary, and Martin Feld, archivist. Wolfe nodded once. Mr. Goodwin, you will visit Kershaw and Blount in the morning. Calder blinked. Tomorrow? By then, Wolfe said. The initial hysteria will have subsided, and explanations will begin to congeal into lies. Calder's lips tightened. I cannot simply appear with a detective at my heels. You will not, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin will appear alone. The telephone rang again. I answered. Goodwin. Saul spoke low. Kramer just arrived. I grinned, despite myself. On schedule. He's not smiling. They're bringing the ledger downstairs. I heard the detective say the page was cut clean. Not torn. Cut, I repeated. Yeah, clean edge. Like with a razor. I thanked him and hung up. Cut clean, I reported. Not ripped. Wolfe's eyes flicked to Calder. Do you habitually carry a razor blade, Mr. Calder? Of course not. Do any of your colleagues? I have no idea. A clean cut, Wolfe murmured. Preliminary deliberation. Calder leaned forward. You see? It was planned. Undoubtedly, Wolfe said. The question remains, by whom and when? At some point between 4:10 and 5, Calder said. I was already en route here. Wolfe regarded him steadily. Or before. Calder froze. To before? It is conceivable, Wolfe said, that the page was removed prior to your departure. The outcry at 5 may represent discovery, not commission. Calder stared. But Miss Vance would have noticed. Would she? Wolfe asked mildly. Does she examine the ledger hourly? Calder faltered. No, but... And you reviewed it this morning? Yes. Alone? In the conference room. With the door closed? Yes. Silence thickened. You imply, Calder said slowly, that I could have removed the page then. I imply nothing, Wolfe said. I enumerate possibilities. The telephone remained silent now, as if even it were waiting. Calder rose again, this time fully. I will not sit here and be dissected. You will, Wolfe said calmly, if you wish my assistance. Calder's breathing quickened. What assistance? To determine whether the disappearance of the clause serves your interest or someone else's. And if it serves mine? Calder demanded. Then, Wolfe said, you have miscalculated gravely. Calder's gaze darted to the door, then back. Inspector Kramer will come here. Almost certainly, I said. And what will you tell him? The truth, Wolfe said. Calder's face drained of color. Which is? That you arrived at 4:58 and have remained under observation since. And before that? Wolfe's eyes hardened. Before that, Mr. Calder, your movements are your responsibility. The bell rang downstairs. We all heard it. Calder closed his eyes briefly. I glanced at Wolfe. He nodded once. I went out to the hall. Fritz was already moving toward the door, his expression resigned. A moment later, he returned with Inspector Kramer, hat in hand, but temper in place. He saw me first. Where is he? In the office, I said. And good evening to you. Kramer brushed past me. He filled the doorway like weather. Wolfe did not rise. Good evening, Inspector. Kramer's gaze landed on Calder and stuck. You, he said flatly. Saves me a trip. Calder swallowed, but held his ground. Kramer turned to Wolfe. You know what's happened? I have been informed, Wolfe said. Kramer's jaw tightened. A page missing from a trust ledger. cut out neat as a coupon. Calder here was last to review it. Then he leaves at 4:10 and vanishes. I did not vanish, Calder said hoarsely. I came here. Convenient, Kramer snapped. Indeed, Wolfe said softly. Remarkably so. Kramer's eyes narrowed. You're mixed up in this? I am, Wolfe said, observing. Kramer snorted. Observe this. If that page isn't found, someone's going down. Wolfe's gaze did not waver. On that, Inspector, we are in agreement. And in the charged silence that followed, I realized something had shifted. The theft was no longer a prediction fulfilled. It was a contest declared. Inspector Kramer removed his hat and planted it on my desk as if staking a claim. All right, he said. Start talking. Calder drew breath. Inspector, I anticipated— You anticipated nothing, Kramer snapped. You were the last man alone with that ledger. I reviewed it this morning in the ordinary course of business. And then you cleared out at 4:10 sharp. I had an appointment. With him? Kramer jerked a thumb toward Wolfe. Yes. Kramer swung to Wolfe. You expect me to believe that's coincidence? I expect you, Wolfe said calmly, to believe nothing without evidence. Kramer's eyes narrowed. What's your angle? I have none. Mr. Calder presented me yesterday with a letter dated tomorrow, predicting precisely the disturbance now agitating you. Kramer blinked. What? I handed him the letter. He scanned it, lips moving slightly. The room went still except for the faint rustle of paper. An alibi written before the crime, Kramer muttered. Precisely, Wolfe said. Kramer looked up sharply at Calder. Are you trying to get clever? I was trying to protect myself, Calder said, his voice tight. I had reason to suspect someone intended to remove that clause and implicate me. Who? Dylan Harlow. Kramer's gaze shifted. The nephew. Yes. Got proof? Only motive. Kramer snorted. Motive's cheap. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Inspector, the page was cut cleanly. Yeah. With a blade. That's what I hear. Which suggests preparation. Kramer grunted. You think Calder packed a razor? I think, Wolfe said, that if Mr. Calder intended the theft, he could have accomplished it this morning when he was alone with the ledger. Kramer turned slowly toward Calder. You were alone? Yes. For how long? Approximately 20 minutes. Kramer's eyebrows climbed. And nobody checked after you? The ledger was not consulted again until late afternoon. So, Kramer said, you could have sliced it out then, tucked it in your briefcase, and staged this whole circus. Calder's face went rigid. That is absurd. Is it? Kramer shot back. Wolfe's voice cut through, level and deliberate. Inspector, if Mr. Calder removed the page this morning, the outcry at 5 o'clock becomes theater. Kramer's head turned. Meaning? Meaning the disappearance was discovered at a time convenient to the narrative Mr. Calder established. Kramer stared at the letter again. Is you saying he set himself up as a witness to his own innocence? I'm saying, Wolfe replied, that he provided himself with an alibi too elaborate to ignore. Calder rose halfway from his chair. You cannot both defend and accuse me. I defend nothing, Wolfe said. I examine. Kramer jammed his hat back onto his head. All right, Calder, you're coming with me. Calder stiffened. On what charge? Suspicion? You have no grounds. Kramer's jaw hardened. Thus, I've got a missing legal document worth millions and a man who predicted it. That's grounds enough for a conversation downtown. Wolfe's eyes flicked to me, then back to Kramer. Inspector, you may question Mr. Calder at your leisure. However, I request that he remain at liberty for the next 24 hours. Kramer barked a short laugh. Request denied. On the contrary, Wolfe said softly, You will find it prudent. Kramer froze. Why? Because if Mr. Calder is arrested prematurely, the true architect of this maneuver may adjust his strategy. Kramer's eyes narrowed. You think there's someone else? I think, Wolfe said, that a theft announced in advance is either the act of a fool or the design of a strategist. Mr. Calder does not strike me as a fool. Calder exhaled shakily, unsure whether he had been complimented. Kramer studied Wolfe for a long moment. They had fenced often enough to recognize when a blade was real. You've got something, Kramer said finally. I have questions. Such as? Who discovered the missing page? Secretary, Kramer said. Vance. At what time? 5 o'clock. Exactly. Near enough. And who was present? Kershaw and Bixby. Feld came in after. Wolfe nodded slowly. Inspector, I suggest you question each of them not merely regarding opportunity, but regarding knowledge of Mr. Calder's appointment here. Kramer's eyes sharpened. You think they knew? I think, Wolfe said. Say, that information is rarely private in a law office. Calder frowned. I did not advertise my plans. You informed your secretary, I said. She told me you were leaving promptly at 4:10. Calder's gaze flicked toward me. That was routine. Routine, Wolfe murmured, is the most efficient carrier of secrets. Kramer exhaled through his nose. All right. Calder stays put tonight, but he checks in tomorrow morning. Calder nodded quickly. Of course. Kramer jabbed a finger toward him. I don't leave town. I have no intention of doing so. Kramer turned back to Wolfe. You sticking your neck out? My neck, Wolfe said, remains precisely where it belongs. Kramer gave me a look that suggested future unpleasantness, then headed for the door. Fritz appeared as if summoned by instinct and escorted him out. The house settled again, but not into comfort. Calder sagged into his chair. Thank you. Do not thank me, Wolfe said. You are not yet safe. Calder ran a hand through his hair. What do you intend to do? Mr. Goodwin will visit your office tomorrow. And you? I will remain here. Calder gave a strained smile. Naturally. Wolfe's eyes hardened. Bring me, he said, a list of every person aware of the Harlow clause and its implications. Not merely those with access to the ledger, those with motive. Calder nodded. I will compile it tonight. And Mr. Calder, Wolfe added. Yes? If you removed that page this morning, confess now. Calder met his gaze. For a moment the room held nothing but silence and the weight of possibility. I did not, he said. Wolfe studied him, then inclined his head once. Very well, he said. Calder rose unsteadily and made for the door. When it closed behind him, I turned to Wolfe. You buying that? I am, Wolfe said quietly. Buying time. For him. For the truth. He reached for the letter again, smoothing it flat beneath his palm. The alibi, he said softly, is either shield or weapon. Tomorrow, Mr. Goodwin, we shall discover which. The next morning I left the brownstone with Wolfe's instructions precise and minimal. Observe, listen, and do not improve the furniture with unnecessary opinions. He was in the plant rooms when I went, communing with orchids and perhaps with logic. The letter lay on his desk where he had left it, as if it were still warm. Kershaw and Blount occupied the 3rd floor of a sober limestone building on Madison. The brass plate beside the door had been polished recently. Anxiety encourages housekeeping. Inside, the reception area smelled faintly of ink and tension. Miss Eleanor Vance rose from her desk as I entered. She was in her early 30s, efficient in posture and expression, with eyes that assessed before they welcomed. Yes? Archie Goodwin. I'd like a word. With whom? With you. Hard to start. Her lips thinned slightly. Mr. Calder is not in yet. I'm aware. This concerns yesterday. Her fingers tightened on a stack of correspondence. Inspector Kramer was here for 2 hours. I'm not Inspector Kramer. No, she said dryly. I gathered that. May we sit? After a brief hesitation, she gestured toward a small conference room, the same, I suspected, where the ledger had been reviewed. I took the chair facing the door. She remained upright, hands folded. Oh, you discovered the missing page, I began. Yes. At 5. Shortly before. How shortly? She considered. 4:55, perhaps. That's earlier than reported. I told the inspector it was near 5. I didn't look at the clock immediately. What drew your attention to the ledger? Mr. Kershaw asked me to retrieve a reference from it. Why? She hesitated. Because of Mr. Calder. Explain. He left abruptly at 4:10. Mr. Kershaw found that unusual. Did he know where Calder was going? I told him Mr. Calder had an appointment. With whom? She met my eyes. He didn't ask. But he knew Calder had somewhere specific to be. Yes. So at 4:55 you opened the ledger? Yes. And the page is gone. Cut out, she said tightly. Very neatly. Did you touch it? I turned the pages, yes. Before calling anyone, I informed Mr. Kershaw immediately. And Mr. Bixby. He was summoned. Was Mr. Feld present? Not at first. He came up from the archives. I nodded. Who else knew about the Harlow clause? Her gaze sharpened. That is confidential. Confidentiality's already been sliced with a razor. She didn't smile. The clause was not common knowledge, but not secret. No. Did Dylan Harlow ever inquire about it? She hesitated again, and that was answer enough. Yes, she said finally. He visited last week. Alone? Yes. And spoke with whom? With Mr. Calder first. Then briefly with Mr. Kershaw. About the clause? I was not present. But you suspected. She inclined her head slightly. Did Mr. Calder appear disturbed after that meeting? Yes. How? He was resolute. That's a polite word. It is accurate. I let that sit. Yesterday morning, I said. Calder reviewed the ledger alone? Yes. Did you see him afterward? He returned it to the cabinet himself. Did you verify the page then? No. Anyone? Not to my knowledge. So from roughly 10:30 in the morning until 4:55, the ledger sat undisturbed. To the best of my knowledge, yes. Accessible. To partners and myself. And Feld. He requires permission. But he has keys. Yes. I stood. Thank you. She rose as well. Mr. Goodwin, do you believe Mr. Calder guilty? I believe, I said, that someone is confident. In what? In timing. Her expression flickered. In the hallway, I nearly collided with a tall man in an immaculate grey suit. He stopped short, irritation flashing before civility replaced it. You must be Mr. Goodwin, he said. Thomas Kershaw. Guilty. He gestured toward his office. A moment. Inside, the decor was restrained and expensive. Kershaw himself was in his late 50s, controlled in voice and posture. Do you represent Mr. Wolfe? He said. I do. Mr. Calder claims he foresaw this theft. So he says. And you? I foresee lunch. His eyes cooled. This is not amusing. Neither is a missing trust clause. He folded his hands. Calder has been aggressive regarding the Harlow Foundation. Too aggressive. Meaning? He presses for its activation before Mrs. Harlow's condition requires it. And you disagree. I prefer patience. Does Mr. Harlow share that preference? Kershaw's gaze sharpened. Dylan is pragmatic. Pragmatic enough to remove a page? That is an accusation. It's a question. He stood. This firm will not be made a stage for theatrics. If Mr. Calder has engineered this to strengthen his position, you think he cut the page himself? I think ambition distorts judgment. Did you know he was coming to Wolfe yesterday? Kershaw hesitated, barely perceptible. He mentioned an external consultation. With a detective? No. But you knew he had an appointment? Yes. And you found that unusual? I found it unnecessary. Unnecessary for what? For a man who claims confidence. I left him with that and found Martin Feld in the archives, a thin man with spectacles and ink on his cuffs. He spoke softly, nervously. I did not touch the ledger yesterday, he said before I asked. You have keys? Yes, but I require instruction. From whom? Any partner. Did any partner request access? No. You're certain? Yes. He swallowed. Mr. Goodwin, whoever removed that page knew exactly where to cut. Meaning? The binding was not damaged. Professional, I said. He nodded. When I returned to the street, the morning had sharpened into cold clarity. 4 people with access. A nephew with motive. A secretary who noticed early. And a page cut with precision. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair, eyes half closed. Well? He asked. I gave him everything in order. When I finished, he remained silent for a long moment. At 4:55, he said finally, Miss Vance discovered the absence. Approximately. And Mr. Calder arrived here at 4:58. On the nose. Wolfe's eyes opened fully. Mr. Goodwin, he said softly. The page was not removed in the afternoon. You're sure? Yes. Then when? Wolfe's gaze drifted to the letter still lying on his desk. In the morning, he said, before the alibi began. I stared at him. You're saying the theft happened while he was alone with it? Yes. And he staged the discovery for late afternoon. Not necessarily, Wolfe said. The removal occurred in the morning. The discovery occurred when it was useful. I sank into my chair. Useful to whom? That, Wolfe said, is the proper question. I ran it through. If Calder cut the page in the morning, he wouldn't need the alibi. He could have simply kept quiet. Unless, Wolfe said, he required the theft to become public immediately. To what end? To force action, to accelerate a decision, to provoke his adversary. Dylan Harlow. Possibly. Or Kershaw, I said. You said routine carries secrets. And if Kershaw knew Calder was coming here, he might anticipate a spectacle, Wolfe finished. I leaned forward. Miss Vance said she noticed at 4:55. That's 3 minutes before Calder rang our bell. Indeed. Too close? Wolfe's eyes gleamed faintly. Exquisitely. I felt it then, the faint click of alignment. If she discovered it at 4:55 and word spread instantly, by 5 o'clock the office is in uproar. Kramer gets called. The Calder is already here. Precisely. So the timing of discovery matters more than the timing of removal. Wolfe inclined his head. Then who benefits from discovering it at that exact moment? I asked. Consider, Wolfe said, who knew Mr. Calder's schedule. Vance, Kershaw, maybe Bixby. And possibly Harlow, if he'd been told. Or if he inquired, Wolfe added. I drummed my fingers. Miss Vance corrected the time. She said 4:55, not 5. A small deviation, Wolfe murmured, but revealing. You think she's lying? I think, Wolfe said, that she is careful. Careful enough to wait until Calder was safely here before raising the alarm. That is conceivable. But if she removed the page in the morning, she could not, Wolfe said. Mr. Calder had the ledger alone in the conference room. Unless he wasn't alone. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. Explain. Feld said he requires permission to access it. But that doesn't mean someone couldn't enter the room while Calder had it. Did Miss Vance indicate interruption? No. Did you inquire? I asked if anyone checked after him. She said no. Wolfe nodded slowly. Then we must assume Mr. Calder was unobserved. Which puts the blade in his hand. Not necessarily, Wolfe said. I waited. The page was cut cleanly without damaging the binding, he continued. That requires steadiness and familiarity with the ledger's construction. Felled, possibly. But why? To frame Calder. For what gain? Protect the nephew. Feld has no stake in the estate, unless someone persuaded him. Wolfe dismissed that with a slight movement of his fingers. Bribery leaves residue, fear leaves haste. This cut was neither. So we circle back to Calder. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closing briefly. Mr. Goodwin, what is the purpose of an alibi? To prove you weren't somewhere. More precisely? To fix your position in time. Yes. His eyes opened again. Mr. Calder fixed his position from 4:58 onward. Right. But he did not account for his position between 10:30 and 4:10. No? Why would an intelligent man omit the interval in which he was alone with the object later found mutilated? I blinked, because he didn't consider it dangerous. Or, Wolfe said softly, just because he did not perceive the theft as complete until the moment of discovery. The thought settled heavily. You mean, I said slowly, that the removal alone wasn't the crime? Precisely. I sat up. The clause isn't valuable just as paper. It's valuable because it exists in the ledger. Yes. If it's cut out but no one notices, the clause still governs. Correct. But once discovered missing, it invites contest, Wolfe said. Litigation, challenge to authenticity. No doubt. I felt it tighten. So the real objective wasn't stealing the page. It was creating uncertainty about it. Exactly. And Calder wanted that uncertainty? Or someone else did? I stood and paced. If Calder cut it in the morning intending to force the issue, why write the letter? To ensure that when discovery occurred, he would appear as the threatened party, not the aggressor. And to involve you, I said. Yes. Why you? Because my presence legitimizes the narrative. I stopped pacing. You think he wanted this to explode? I think, Wolfe said, that he wished to force resolution before Mrs. Harlowe's condition deteriorated further. Meaning the nephew loses leverage. Possibly. And if the clause's authenticity is questioned, then those who drafted and witnessed it must testify. Kershaw, Bixby. Yes. And any disagreement becomes public. Wolfe nodded. I let out a low breath. So Calder cuts the page in the morning, waits, ensures he's seen leaving at 4:10, comes here. Miss Vance discovers the absence at 4:55. Or is instructed to do so, Wolfe said. By whom? That, Wolfe said, remains delicate. The telephone rang. I snatched it up. Goodwin. Saul's voice came through. You'll want this. Harlowe just left the firm. When? About 20 minutes ago. Alone? Yeah. Visiting? Looks like it. I covered the receiver and relayed it. Wolfe's eyes hardened. Mr. Goodwin, telephone Mr. Harlowe and request his presence here this evening. I spoke back into the phone. Saul, find out what time he arrived. On it. I hung up. You're assembling them, I said. Yes. All of them. In due course. I looked at the letter again. The alibi, I said quietly. Wasn't to avoid suspicion. No, Wolfe replied. It was to define the battlefield. And now? Wolfe's gaze settled, cold and precise. Now, he said, as we determine who believed he could write the outcome before the crime was understood. By 6 o'clock, The brownstone had admitted more ambition than it preferred. Dylan Harlow arrived first. He was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, well-groomed, and carrying confidence the way some men carry concealed weapons. His handshake was firm, his smile calibrated. "I understand my name has been circulating," he said. "It has been enunciated," Wolfe corrected from his chair. "Circulation implies contagion." Harlow's smile thinned but held. "If this concerns the unfortunate disturbance at Kershaw and Blount." "It does," Wolfe said. Calder arrived 3 minutes later, pale but composed. He avoided Harlow's gaze and took the red leather chair without invitation. Miss Vance came next, summoned by my earlier telephone call, her expression disciplined. Kershaw followed, irritation radiating from him like heat from stone. Bixby, and a compact man with sharp eyes and a mouth that rarely softened, completed the circle. Fritz closed the door. The office felt smaller. Wolfe surveyed them without haste. "You are here," he said, "because a single sheet of paper has altered your equilibrium." Kershaw shifted. "Mr. Wolfe, this gathering is necessary," Wolfe said calmly, "because the theft of the Harlow clause was not an impulsive act. It was deliberate, timed." Harlow folded his arms. "Are you accusing someone?" "I am," Wolfe said, "describing intention." He turned to Calder. "You informed this company that you anticipated the clause would disappear." "Yes." "And you arranged to be observed leaving your office at 4:10. "Yes." "And you arrived here at 4:58. "Yes." Wolfe's gaze moved to Miss Vance. "You discovered the absence at approximately 4:55. "Yes." "You are certain of that time?" She hesitated only a fraction. "Yes." Wolfe nodded. "Mr. and Feld is not present, but he has affirmed he did not access the ledger yesterday." Bixby cleared his throat. "This is absurd. The simplest explanation is that Calder removed the page in the morning." "Indeed," Wolfe said mildly. "It is the simplest." Calder's jaw tightened. Wolfe continued. "However, simplicity often conceals motive rather than reveals it. Let us consider what the removal accomplished." Harlow shifted his weight. "It created chaos." "Precisely," Wolfe said. "So it created uncertainty regarding the validity of the Harlow clause." Kershaw frowned. "The existence of the clause is not in doubt." "On the contrary," Wolfe said, "once the original is mutilated, authenticity becomes contestable." Silence pressed in. Harlow's smile faded. "Are you suggesting I engineered this to challenge the trust?" "I am suggesting," Wolfe replied, "that you benefit from uncertainty." Harlow's eyes hardened. "I would not need theatrics." "Perhaps not," Wolfe said. "But you did visit the firm yesterday." Harlow glanced at Kershaw, then back. "Yes." "At what time?" Wolfe asked. "Approximately 4:30. Calder's head snapped up. 4:30. Harlow met his gaze coolly. "I had business." Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. "Miss Vance, did you observe Mr. Harlow's arrival?" "Yes," she said. "He came at 4:28. "And departed?" "Shortly before 5. Calder stared at her. "You did not tell me that." "You did not ask," she replied evenly. Wolfe's fingers tapped once against his desk. "Mr. Harlow, where were you between 4:30 and 4:55? "In Mr. Kershaw's office." Kershaw nodded stiffly. "We discussed procedural matters." "And at 4:55, Wolfe pressed. "I was still there." Miss Vance spoke quietly. "Mr. Kershaw left his office briefly at 4:50. Kershaw turned sharply. "To retrieve a file." "Which file?" Wolfe asked. Kershaw hesitated. "Irrelevant." "On the contrary," Wolfe said. "Precision is indispensable," Bixby interjected. "This line of inquiry is preposterous. The ledger was intact at 10:30. Calder was alone with it. The rest is smoke." Wolfe regarded him. Is it? He leaned back slightly, hands folded. Mr. Calder removed the page in the morning. Calder started. I did not. You removed it, Wolfe continued calmly, because you required the clause's absence to provoke immediate scrutiny. Calder's face flushed. That is false. Silence, Wolfe said softly, and the word settled like a weight. You removed it in the morning, Wolfe went on. When you were alone, you cut it cleanly, preserving the binding. You placed the page in your possession. Calder's hands trembled. No. You then ensured you were seen leaving at 4:10. You came here, establishing your position. You expected the discovery to occur at 5, as routine resumed. Calder shook his head. I did not control the discovery. No, Wolfe said. But you anticipated it. He turned his gaze to Miss Vance. And you, Miss Vance, discovered the absence at 4:55, 3 minutes before Mr. Calder arrived here. Her composure faltered for the first time. Yes, you discovered it, Wolfe said, because Mr. Harlowe's presence required acceleration. All eyes swung to Harlowe. Wolfe continued, voice measured. Mr. Harlowe arrived at 4:28. He was aware Mr. Calder had an appointment here. He also knew that if the clause's absence were revealed while he was present, suspicion would fix upon Mr. Calder immediately. Harlowe's jaw tightened. That is conjecture. Is it? Wolfe asked. Miss Vance, who informed Mr. Harlowe that Mr. Calder was leaving at 4:10? Silence. Routine, Wolfe murmured. The most efficient carrier of secrets. Miss Vance looked down. Calder's voice was hoarse. Eleanor? She lifted her gaze slowly. You told me you were coming here. And you told him, Wolfe said. Her lips parted, then closed. Harlowe stepped forward. This is ridiculous. Even if I knew, I did not remove the page. Correct, Wolfe said calmly. You did not. The room stilled. Mr. Calder did, Wolfe said. Calder recoiled as if struck. You removed it, Wolfe continued, to force litigation and compel immediate recognition of the foundation before Mrs. Harlowe's death. As you wrote the alibi to frame yourself as target rather than instigator. Calder's face drained of color. But, Wolfe said, you miscalculated one element. Calder whispered, What? You underestimated Mr. Harlowe's impatience. Harlowe's eyes narrowed. When Mr. Harlowe learned of your appointment, Wolfe went on, he realized the theft would be discovered after you secured your alibi. Therefore, so he advanced the moment of discovery by ensuring Miss Vance examined the ledger while he was present. Miss Vance's shoulders sagged. I did not remove the page, she said quietly. It was already gone. Of course, Wolfe replied. You merely announced its absence. Calder stared at Harlowe. You. Harlowe's expression hardened. You forced this. Wolfe's voice cut through. Gentlemen, the page itself remains with Mr. Calder. Calder's hand flew to his briefcase. Produce it, Wolfe said, and for a long moment no one moved. Then, slowly, Calder opened the case. Inside, between 2 folders, lay a single sheet of paper. The alibi had been written, but the crime, at last, was understood. No one spoke as Calder lifted the sheet from his briefcase. It trembled slightly between his fingers, not from guilt alone, but from the collapse of something carefully engineered. Kershaw stared as if the paper were an insect newly discovered in his soup. Bixby's lips compressed to a thin white line, till Miss Vance closed her eyes briefly. Dylan Harlowe did not move at all. Calder placed the page on Wolfe's desk. I intended to return it, he said hoarsely. After what? Wolfe asked. After the foundation was secured, after the board was recognized. I needed leverage. You needed spectacle, Wolfe corrected. Calder's shoulders sagged. Mrs. Harlowe's condition is worsening. If she dies before the foundation is formalized, Dylan controls everything. Harlow's voice was cold. According to the existing trust, yes. And you would bury her intentions under procedural delay, Calder shot back. I would administer the estate prudently. You would strangle it, Calder said. Wolfe lifted a hand, and the room obeyed. Mr. Calder, he said, you removed the clause in the morning to force immediate scrutiny. You assumed that once its absence was discovered, the firm would be compelled to reconstruct and validate it publicly. Yes. You further assumed that your presence here at the moment of discovery would shield you from accusation long enough to achieve that objective. Yes. You wrote the letter to ensure I would serve as independent witness to your innocence. Calder's jaw tightened. To my presence. Presence, Wolfe said dryly, is a convenient substitute for innocence. Calder swallowed. Wolfe turned his gaze to Harlow. And you, sir, and upon learning of Mr. Calder's appointment, recognized his design. Harlow's expression did not change. I recognized ambition. You recognized threat, Wolfe said. If discovery occurred after Mr. Calder secured his alibi, suspicion would diffuse. If it occurred while you were present, it would crystallize. Harlow did not answer. Therefore, Wolfe continued, you encouraged Miss Vance to examine the ledger before Mr. Calder arrived here. Miss Vance spoke softly. Mr. Harlow asked whether the Harlow documents were intact. He said, it would be unfortunate if anything were misplaced while Mr. Calder was out seeking counsel. Kershaw's head snapped toward her. Why did you not say this earlier? She met his gaze steadily. Because I did not understand its significance. Harlow's voice sharpened. I made no accusation. I merely inquired. An inquiry precisely timed, Wolfe said. Harlow's composure thinned. Calder stole the page. Yes, Wolfe said. And you ensured his theft was exposed in a manner most damaging to him. Silence. Calder looked from one to the other, his anger draining into something closer to regret. I meant to protect Mrs. Harlow's wishes. By undermining the integrity of the trust, Kershaw said stiffly. By compelling you to act, Calder retorted. Bixby leaned forward. You have jeopardized the entire estate. Not irreparably, Wolfe said. All eyes turned to him. The page exists, he continued, tapping it lightly. And its removal was clean, the binding undamaged. Its authenticity is not compromised. Kershaw frowned. But the act is unethical, Wolfe finished. Yes. However, it does not invalidate the clause. Harlow's gaze hardened. It invites litigation. It invites scrutiny, Wolfe said, which may be beneficial. Calder looked at him sharply. Wolfe continued, voice even. Mrs. Harlow's intent can be affirmed by testimony from those present at the drafting. If that testimony is unified, the foundation stands. Kershaw hesitated. It would require formal acknowledgement. Then provide it, Wolfe said. Harlow's jaw clenched. And surrender discretionary control? You would surrender nothing not already designated, Wolfe replied. The tension in the room shifted subtly. The crime had been intellectual. The remedy would be as well. Kramer's heavy tread sounded in the hallway before anyone spoke again. The door opened without ceremony. I thought I'd find a party, he said. His gaze took in the group, the paper on Wolfe's desk, Calder's ashen face. What's this? He demanded. The missing page, Wolfe said. Kramer crossed the room in 2 strides and snatched it up. He examined it, then looked at Calder. You had it? Yes, Calder said quietly. Kramer's mouth tightened. You're under arrest. Inspector, Wolfe said calmly. I suggest restraint. Kramer swung toward him. He cut it out. Yes, that's tampering with legal documents. Indeed, Wolfe said. However, the page is intact. No financial harm has occurred. Intent counts. Intent, Wolfe said. was not to defraud, but to compel. Kramer snorted. That'll play well in court. Wolfe's gaze did not waver. If you arrest Mr. Calder now, the ensuing scandal will eclipse Mrs. Harlowe's condition and delay resolution indefinitely. Kramer hesitated. Whereas, Wolfe continued, if the firm acknowledges the clause formally this evening, restores the page, and affirms the foundation publicly, thus the matter concludes without further injury. Kershaw's lips thinned. That would contain the damage. Bixby nodded reluctantly. Harlowe's eyes flicked from face to face, calculating. Kramer glared at Wolfe. You're bargaining. I am, Wolfe said, proposing efficiency. Silence held for a long moment. Finally, Kramer exhaled. You've got 24 hours. After that, if I don't see formal action, I file charges. Calder nodded stiffly. Understood. Kramer pointed a finger at him. I don't mistake this for mercy. He turned and left, the door closing with finality. The room remained still. Kershaw looked at Calder. You will return that page now. Calder handed it over without resistance. And you will draft a memorandum acknowledging the clause and the board, Kershaw added. Calder nodded. Harlowe's voice was tight. This is not finished. No, Wolfe said quietly. It is concluded. Harlowe met his gaze, then looked away. One by one they departed. The office emptying of ambition and leaving only paper and consequence behind. When the door closed on the last of them, I looked at Wolfe. Compel, I said. He closed his eyes briefly. Justice, he murmured, is sometimes a matter of timing. The house felt larger after they left, as if it had expelled an unpleasant draft and was settling back into its own dimensions. Wolfe remained in his chair, eyes closed, to hands resting on the arms as though nothing more strenuous than a misplaced comma had occurred. I knew better. For him, moral architecture required more exertion than climbing stairs. You let him walk, I said. Yes. He admitted cutting it. Yes. And Kramer gave him 24 hours. Correct. I crossed to the window and looked out at the street. A delivery truck rumbled past, indifferent to trust clauses and tactical ambition. Do you think they'll formalize it tonight? They will, Wolfe said. You're certain? I am. I turned back. Because they're afraid of scandal. Because, Wolfe said, opening his eyes, they have now observed the consequences of delay. I leaned against my desk. Calder gambled. Yes. He almost lost. He did lose, Wolfe corrected. He lost control. I considered that. Calder had written an alibi before the crime, intending to master the sequence. Instead, Harlowe had altered the tempo, and forcing exposure sooner than planned. The nephew moved faster, I said. Impatience is often underestimated, Wolfe replied. And Miss Vance? An instrument, Wolfe said. Not malicious, merely responsive to authority. I nodded slowly. You were hard on Calder. I was accurate. You believe his motive? I believe he convinced himself of it. That's not the same thing. No, Wolfe said. It is rarely the same. The telephone rang. I answered. Goodwin. Kershaw's voice came through, clipped but controlled. The board will convene at 8. The clause will be acknowledged and entered into supplemental record. Mrs. Harlowe's physician will witness. Efficient, I said. We prefer resolution, he replied stiffly. I relayed it to Wolfe after hanging up. He nodded once. As predicted. And Harlowe? He will not contest it publicly, Wolfe said. To do so would expose his intervention. You're assuming he values discretion. He values control, Wolfe said. Control thrives in shadow, not glare. I let that settle. What about Kramer? You will telephone him at 9. Wolfe said, and inform him that the page has been restored and the memorandum drafted. And Calder. He will remain at the firm. Under watch. Yes. Silence filled the office, but it was no longer charged. It was reflective. You know, I said, if Harlow hadn't pushed for early discovery, Calder might have gotten away with it clean. Possibly, Wolfe said. He miscalculated the human element. Yes, and you counted on it. Wolfe's lips twitched faintly. I observed it. I grinned. Sure, he ignored that. Mr. Goodwin, he said after a moment, what is the purpose of an alibi? You asked me that already. Answer again. To fix your position in time. And if the alibi precedes the crime, then it's not about location, I said slowly. It's about shaping perception. Precisely. Calder had attempted to shape perception so that when the page vanished, he would appear victim rather than architect. Harlow, in turn, had attempted to shape perception so that Calder would appear culprit without refuge. And you, I said, shaped it so that neither got what they wanted. I restored proportion, Wolfe said. Fritz entered quietly. Dinner will be served in 10 minutes. Wolfe inclined his head in gratitude. It was as if justice and cuisine were adjacent obligations. I lingered a moment longer. You think Calder learned anything? Wolfe regarded me. He learned that manipulation invites counter-manipulation. Think he'll try it again? Ambition rarely retires, Wolfe said. It adapts. At 9, I telephoned Kremer. He grunted at the news, asked 2 curt questions, and ended with a warning that he was still watching. I assured him the city would survive the evening. When I returned to the dining room, Wolfe was already seated, napkin arranged, expression composed. Fritz served trout with almonds, steam rising in the delicate curls. The normalcy of it was almost obscene after the day's maneuvering. Halfway through the meal, Wolfe spoke. Mr. Goodwin, what would have occurred had Mr. Calder succeeded entirely? He'd have forced the firm's hand. And Mr. Harlow? He'd have lost quiet control. And Mrs. Harlow? She'd have gotten her foundation. Wolfe nodded. And the means? Questionable, I said. Yes. He took a measured sip of beer. Ends do not sanctify means. They merely disguise them. I smiled faintly. You didn't call Kramer because you were feeling charitable. No. You called him off because the foundation mattered. Wolfe considered that, then shook his head slightly. I called him off because the law serves order. In this instance, an order was restored more effectively without spectacle. That's almost generous. It is practical. We finished in silence for a time. Outside, the city moved through its own calculations, unaware that a single sheet of paper had nearly redirected a fortune. When dessert arrived, Wolfe leaned back, satisfied. The alibi, he said, was written before the crime. But the crime was not the removal of paper. No, Wolfe said. The crime was arrogance, the belief that one may script events without accounting for others' will. I rose, collecting my notebook from the sideboard. And the punishment? I asked. Wolfe's eyes rested on the orchids beyond the dining room door. Reality, he said. I considered Calder, Harlow, the firm, and the fragile thread of intention that had bound them. Next time, I said, maybe they'll write something simpler. Wolfe's gaze shifted to me, faintly amused. Mr. Goodwin, he said, simplicity is the rarest fiction of all. And with that, the brownstone returned to its proper silence, chronology restored, and appetite undisturbed. Morning arrived with the deliberate calm that follows upheaval. The brownstone had resumed its habits, Wolfe in the plant rooms at 9, Fritz conducting his culinary rites, and me at my desk with a stack of correspondence that looked harmless and wasn't. At 8:30 the telephone rang. Goodwin. Kershaw's voice carried a different texture now. Less rigidity, more restraint. The memorandum has been signed. The clause has been reinserted and notarized in the presence of Mrs. Harlowe's physician. The foundation will be announced within the week. Efficient, I said again. There will be no charges, he added. Inspector Kramer has been informed. And Mr. Calder? A pause. He has tendered a letter acknowledging misconduct, and the partners will determine disciplinary measures internally. I relayed the message upstairs at 11 when Wolfe descended, smelling faintly of damp loam and satisfaction. He listened without comment, then nodded once, as anticipated. You sound disappointed, I said. I'm not disappointed, he replied. I'm reflective. I poured him beer precisely at 11:15. He took a measured sip and fixed me with that gaze that meant the lesson was not yet complete. Mr. Goodwin, he said, Sir, what was the true peril in this matter? The money, I said. The control of the estate. He shook his head slightly. Money is an instrument. The peril was corruption of process. Meaning? Meaning that Mr. Calder believed he could distort procedure to achieve a virtuous end. And Harlowe believed he could distort perception to preserve advantage. Yes, and the firm preferred quiet to clarity, I added. Precisely. I leaned back. If you'd let Kramer take Calder, and the foundation might have collapsed under scandal. Quite possibly. You saved it. Wolfe's eyes hardened faintly. I preserved balance. Mr. Calder saved it by confessing. I thought about that. He hadn't resisted when the page was produced. He hadn't lied. Not once Wolfe had laid the structure bare. You think he expected you to expose him? He expected me to shield him, Wolfe said. And instead? I compelled him to confront the consequences of his stratagem. You could have humiliated him. I did not. You could have handed him to Kramer. I did not. Why? Wolfe regarded his glass. Because punishment must serve proportion. I let that settle. Calder had risked the integrity of a trust to force a moral outcome. Harlowe had nearly turned that risk into ruin. In the end, neither had prevailed entirely. At noon, Saul telephoned to report that Dylan Harlowe had left the firm's building early. Expression severe, destination unknown. He won't contest it, I said after hanging up. No, Wolfe agreed. He has been observed. By you. By circumstance, Wolfe corrected. I grinned. You make it sound cosmic. It is merely logical. The afternoon passed in relative quiet. No outraged nephews, no trembling secretaries, no inspectors with blunt questions. By 5, the city's noise filtered in through the windows like distant surf, ordinary and indifferent. I found myself looking again at the desk where the letter had first lain. A sheet dated tomorrow, promising disruption. You know, I said, if Calder hadn't written that letter, you might never have been involved. Indeed. He could have cut the page, waited, and argued later. Yes. But he wanted control over the narrative. Exactly. And by writing the alibi in advance, he declared himself author. Yes. I smiled faintly. Only he forgot other people write too. Wolfe's eyes warmed almost imperceptibly. An excellent metaphor, Mr. Goodwin. I accepted the compliment with appropriate gravity. At dinner, Fritz surpassed himself. Duck with cherries, a dish Wolfe approached with reverence. The mood was lighter, but not careless. Halfway through, Wolfe set down his fork. Mr. Goodwin, he said, do you recall my question regarding the purpose of an alibi? Fix your position in time. And what did Mr. Calder fix? His presence here at 4:58. And what did he fail to fix? The meaning of that presence. Wolfe inclined his head. Precisely. An alibi secures location. It does not secure motive. I considered the arc of it. Calder had tried to weaponize absence. Harlow had tried to weaponize timing. Miss Vance had tried to obey. The partners had tried to avoid noise. In the end, the page had never truly been lost, only the illusion of control. After dessert, I poured coffee. Wolfe leaned back, content. "Do you think Mrs. Harlow will ever know?" I asked. "Of the page?" he said. "Yes. Perhaps not." "And that's just?" Wolfe's gaze drifted toward the window, where the city lights were beginning to glow. "Justice," he said slowly, "is not exhibition. It is equilibrium." I let that sit. "Calder will have to live with it," I said. "Oh, yes." "And Harlow?" "He will adapt." "And the firm?" "They will remember." Silence settled, companionable and intact. I thought about that first moment. The envelope, the date written one day ahead, the confidence in prediction. Calder had believed he could outpace consequence by anticipating it. Instead, he had learned that foresight without humility is merely another form of blindness. Wolfe rose, signaling the evening's conclusion. As I gathered the coffee cups, I said, "Next time someone writes you tomorrow's alibi today, what will you do?" Wolfe paused at the doorway, his silhouette broad against the hall light. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "I shall read it carefully." I laughed. Behind us, the brownstone resumed its stillness, chronology restored not by force, but by reason. The alibi had been written before the crime, but it was logic, patient, immovable, that wrote the ending. And in that, as always, Nero Wolfe remained precisely where he intended to be,